again, and welcome back to Ride Rescue. In the last episode, I saved the dash from the trash. So, in this episode, I need to clean it all up. It's got a kind of an oily film residue all over everything. Needs to be polished up. There's some silver trim around a lot of these areas that is worn off. So, I show you how to touch those up and make this dash look new again. As I'm putting this back together, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but it's really hazy, and I could paint this all black, but man, it's a lot of work, and I still have to clean it all up. I'm just going to take a little of my swirl remover and see if I can just buff that up a little bit. The textured surfaces look fine. It's just the smooth surface. It's just really dingy and, just greasy. Definitely taking something off. Yep, that's what it needed. Just brought that right back to life. It looks like I could bring this to a high gloss, but I really don't want a high gloss. You don't want to be reflecting surface. I want a nice satin finish, so I don't want to get too carried away, because I could just keep going until it was really super shiny. That's about right. It looks really good. Do this other side. Oh yeah, it's been getting grime all over it. Didn't realize how bad that was. Very nice. What I did is, this lens was so warped, it really had a curve to it, but it was mostly right down the middle of this channel. So what I did is I heated it up with some hot melt adhesive, and then I put a bead of hot melt adhesive through the back of it, and it flattened right out on this side. Pretty close on this side. I didn't want to press it much further because I was afraid I was going to crack it. But by putting a bead of the hot melt adhesive along the back of it, it'll hold that form pretty good. Now when I drop it into place, oh yes, much better. Now that is the way it's supposed to look. It's not perfect, but it is so close that nobody will ever even notice it. Before, it just really stood out. It looked absolutely horrible, but that looks fantastic. When it comes to painting this line around this trim, from the factory, it was a chrome looking finish. You could see that on some of the other gauges, especially on the lenses for the cover or for the center dash. I haven't found anything that will give you that look. You can use silver paints, it'll come really close. And that's what I'm going to do with this. Now, if I was to spray it on, you can follow the instructions. There are techniques. You can get some similarity. You're not going to get exactly the same, leastwise I've never been able to. When it comes to spraying it on, you're going to get a lot closer to a chrome look. But to be able to mask off this area, it's just impossible. There's a lot of texture. The edges, it's very difficult to get right up against the edge perfectly. So I'm just going to brush it on. And I've got a whole bunch of brushes here, you can see, for fine lines. Most of these are for heavier paints. So when you get a thick consistency, you can bring a nice bead along, like pinstriping. This stuff sprayed into a little tin. I have a little aluminum cup here that I'll paint out of. It's so thin, and the consistency is so runny that a heavier bristle brush like these, it loads up with so much paint that when you go to paint, it just runs everywhere. So I typically use this tiny, I mean, it's like has 4 or 5 hairs on it. It's so minimal, and it takes forever to put down a bead, but it doesn't run all over. So I'm going to try a couple here just to show you what I have and what techniques I use. And I'm going to try to put it along a different piece just so that you can see how it reacts. I mean, this is fairly wide, but it'll kind of give us a good idea of what brushes will work. Okay, I'm going to start with one that's fairly long, fairly bulky. As this sets in the cup and it sets up a little bit, it does make it easier to work with. It's not as runny. So it usually takes 10 minutes or so, but hopefully you can see this. I can brush along this surface pretty good, but I don't know, it's really hard to tell, I'm sure, from the camera's point of view. But that's putting on a pretty good bead. It's not running off the edges. It is a little bit, so I'd have to be really careful to not get it over the edges of a finer line like this one. So this brush has potential. I'm going to clean that brush off and set it aside, since this does have a tendency to dry up so quickly. This one has a much longer hair. I'll be able to load this brush up like you would a pinstripe brush. With one that's this long, your technique is going to be much more difficult. You've got to have something to rest your hand on. This puts down a nice line. I'm not getting any, well, yeah, I am. I'm getting runs over the backside. If I were to just kind of dab it across the edge, I have a much better chance of getting it along the edge and not flowing over. So that looks pretty good, but I'm gonna have to do several coats. And already my brush is dry. So this paint dries really quickly. If I was to use a pinstripe type paint, it's thicker, but it doesn't dry as quickly. But this brush, once it starts to dry on the brush, I do like the way it goes down, but it is much more difficult to control, just because it's so flimsy. And it's one thing to try to control it on this large edge, but this edge is so small. I'm definitely going to be struggling to keep it along that edge. Now this brush, it's kind of a medium between the other two. Has a less bristles, a lot less length to it. Now again, I want to try to put this down like you would a pinstripe. A lot more control with this brush. I like the flow of the tip. The paint is still just a little too thin. It's wanting to flow out and not leave a good consistent coating. But it's not running over the edges. Well, I take that back. It is running over the edge a little bit. I will have to be really careful not to put it on too heavy. It does seem to work better to go across the grain instead of with the grain. And I'm not getting anything running off the edges. So far I'm really liking this brush. So I'm going to not clean that one up just yet. And then I'll try my really fine tip. The fine tip, you can see I have much more control. So with a really fine brush, I mean, we're talking really, really fine brush, I have much more control, and going against the grain is probably the only way I'm going to be able to get enough paint to get out of this brush. You can see I can easily paint over the edge, so I have to be really super careful to not go back and forth like I was. I've just got to just barely dab across the top. I'm still going over the edge though. So I want to practice a little bit more. That technique is working the best. It's going to take 2 coats though. So I think this brush is just too fine, too small. So I'm going to stick with this brush. I think these others just have too many bristles. I'm going to start along this edge. I've got a little bit over the edge here. I've got really good control on this side. So as I'm brushing off, the bristles are dropping down on the back side, and it's leaving a little bit of a trail. I'll show you how you can clean that up with another brush. I do have to be very careful with it, but it works very well. Just get a clean brush and put it in your lacquer thinner, and then you just go along that edge and clean it up, and then you'll end up with a little bit of paint on the bristles. So as you go back and clean up a little bit more, you're going to start painting the black surface area. So you'll have to clean your brush a lot to keep that off, but that way it's very effective in cleaning it off. And now I have a good crisp line. This paint does have a pretty good metallic surface floating to the surface, so I'm really pleased with that. It's not as good as the factory, but much better than a lot of the silvers I've used, so I'm really pleased with this metallic. The consistency in my cup is starting to thicken up, so it's a good consistency right now. I can now use the side of my brush and not have to worry about it dropping down off this back side, but I am noticing my brush was just a little bit too wet. So now I've dropped off the front side as I drag it across the edge. So before that has a tendency to dry up, I've got to get out my lacquer thinner again and clean that edge off. Yeah, I ended up, I don't know if you can see that in the camera lens, but there's quite a bit that is dripping off the back there when I had it too wet. I want to clean that off. There we go. Only got about 5 more feet to go. A little bit off the edge again. And brush, clean, repeat. As this paint is setting up, it's getting thicker and thicker in my cup. It's flowing much better. I'm getting a better line, better control. I'm not getting any seepage off of each side. I can pretty much drag my bristles across, at least some brush strokes, and then I can go back and just kind of feather it out. But it's leaving both sides really clean. This top edge can be seen pretty clearly from the driver's seat, so it's where I want perfection, absolute perfection. It's also where it's all been completely worn off just from handling the dash over the years. It is a little bit of a waviness on this back edge, so I'm still having to clean that up, but nowhere near as bad as it was when the paint was thinner and runnier. Looking really good. I'm very pleased with that. Top side, everything that you can see, you'll be seeing from the seat. Looks very good, very pleased. Now that I've pretty much got this figured out, I'll move on to the really hard areas. And right away, I'm running down the bottom. Just too wet. Let's try that again. Much better. So far, so good. That's great having this dash all finished up now and ready to go back in. I still need to do a few other details to the dash and the steering column. The prior owner still has that vent here that's missing, so I still need to get that from him. So thanks for watching my video. I really appreciate you tuning in. If you like what I'm doing, hit the like button, share it. If you haven't subscribed already, I really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. Leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for watching. Goodbye for now.